Good evening, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining us for another inspiring and exciting evening of the 2013-2014 Religious Life Lecture Series of Campus Ministry, King's University College, here at the beautiful Windermere on the Mount. My name is Melissa Page Nichols, and I am the Pastoral Counselor on staff with the Office of Campus Ministry. This evening's lecture is sponsored by the community of the Sisters of St. Joseph, and I will now invite Sister Joan Atkinson to introduce our speaker for this evening.
I'm getting old. Well, I have the honor of introducing and welcoming Shelagh Rogers to London, to King's University College, and as the invited guest of the Sisters of St. Joseph, who are sponsoring this lecture. Now, I know that Shelagh hardly needs any introduction. You know, just close your eyes. Imagine that you have the radio on in your bedroom or your kitchen or wherever you listen to, tuned in to CBC, and you can hear her warm and intelligent conversation with some artist or writer or musician or other Canadian whose story she deems it important for us all to hear. We have sat with Shelagh many times, learning with her as she has shed light on others' stories. Shelagh's a veteran broadcaster, a journalist who has worked with many other famous names on CBC, with Peter Zosky on Morningside. She's hosted Sounds Like Canada, and presently hosts and co-produces The Next Chapter, a program devoted to Canadian writing and Canadian stories. Shelagh also is the recipient of many awards for her outstanding work. Just to cite a few, she's received the John Draney Award, Canada's highest broadcasting honor, for her significant contribution to Canadian broadcasting. She's also the recipient of 4 honorary doctorates, including one from our own Western University here in London. Shelagh is also a strong voice and a believer in reconciliation between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people in Canada. And we had a wonderful conversation over dinner about some of our experiences around that theme. And she serves as an honorary witness for the work of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, work that is unfolding and that I'm sure we're all aware of. She's the co-editor of a book, Speaking My Truth, Reflections on Reconciliation and Residential Schools. And Shelagh will share some of these experiences and the impact this has had on her as a Canadian, but maybe also how she's seen some of these stories touch the lives of others. But Shelagh is also a human being with her own story, and she has decided to share some of this with us as well. She crisscrosses the country to topple the stigma around mental illness, and speaking openly about some of her own struggles with depression. And this also is some of the story we will hear. Stories are important because they tell us who we are. and how we tell those stories speaks about the character and understanding of ourselves and others. So only a good broadcaster can weave these threads together. So please join me in welcoming Shelagh Rogers.
Creek, you came. I'm so glad. You know, when people throw a party, it's so nice when they come. Thank you for that beautiful, beautiful introduction. I love what you said about stories, and I'm going to appropriate it. I always find it interesting being called someone who needs no introduction. I think people like Peter Mansbridge needs no introduction, but even Peter. One night he was driving to his cottage in the Gatineau Hills, and he was speeding to get there, and he was pulled over for speeding. And, you know, he rolled down his window. Well, I'm sure he just pressed a button. He probably has that kind of car. And the policeman looked in, and he went, "Oh, I recognize you." And Peter's thought cloud is, "Oh, I'm not going to get a ticket." And the cop said, "We were in grade 8 Scouts together." and then he said to Peter, "What are you doing now?" And so... And he did get a ticket, which is wonderful. I am delighted to be here, and before I begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of the Oneida Nation, the Delaware Nation, and the Chippewa Nation, and thank them for their continuous welcome to their land and also the stewardship of it. Thank you also for this invitation to be in, well, what I will now call a sacred space. This is absolutely beautiful. So if you find yourself wandering off, just, you know, look at the ceiling and admire the stained glass and just enjoy it. I'm very happy to be with you this evening. This is a great opportunity for me I know that this year's theme is inspiration, and there are many people who have inspired me on my journey. Joan mentioned Peter Zosky, of course. I was very fortunate to work with him. Some people here are too young to remember who he was. Put simply, probably the greatest broadcaster Canada has ever produced. He linked this nation by stories. And people in Toronto were interested in the stories of people in Moose Jaw, and people in Moose Factory were interested in the stories of people in Lunenburg. And small stories and big stories alike, the stories that were told on this program were the stories of ordinary lives. And this is the narrative, the human narrative that I have come to love most as a journalist. My own human narrative has its ups and downs, and I recognized that something wasn't right with me in my teens. I was feeling not just very blue, I felt empty. I felt a great void in my life, and I was 17 years old. In fact, I'd been in a car accident that Christmas where I'd gone through the windshield, and there's some speculation now that what I now know to be depression may have been caused by a very severe concussion. But I went to the Queen's University Health Center and said to the doctor, I have a real problem. I mean, I've got weeks where I can't get out of bed, and nothing means anything to me. I feel like I'm just a little husk. And I don't think I actually said that. That's what I wish I had said. But I did feel like a husk. I felt like a shell of myself, and I did not feel like participating in my life. And what I was diagnosed with was it's hormonal, and that it will pass. And in those days, no, forgive me, we're really going into my reproductive system now, okay? But we weren't really talking about something called PMS, premenstrual syndrome. But he felt it was a hormonal thing, it would go away, but it wasn't something that went away, and it also wasn't something I had every month. But every time I went to seek treatment or advice from a doctor, I skewed my own self-diagnosis as hormonal. And I took a lot of things that I probably shouldn't have taken to address this issue, and it didn't help what was really wrong with me. And I had weeks and weeks during years and years where I had to be absent from my own life. And I couldn't get out of bed, I couldn't leave the house, I didn't answer the phone, I didn't return calls on a device we used to call an answering machine. Remember those? Now it's this thing. But I have a friend who is a publisher who called this my disappearing act. And I didn't have a name for it. I didn't know why I was doing this disappearing act. And it wasn't until 2003, which it really hits me in the year 2013, it was only 10 years ago, that I got a diagnosis of depression, unipolar depression. Some of you may know this story. I've spoken in London before. It's also all over the internet. At one point I thought, I must be Canada's most famous depressed person. Until Clara Hughes started speaking out about depression. And in fact, just to digress, she and I were both up in the Torn Gap Mountains in Labrador this summer. And she was anxious. She and her husband were going off on a hike, but the weather wasn't going to allow them to do that for a few days. So she and I had what we called a fun chat about depression with, it's not a word of a lie, especially here in the chapel. It was fun because if you can't laugh at it and stare it down that way, then it's going to defeat you. But we were able to talk to some Inuit youth about it, and as you may know, depression, mental illness, and suicide in Aboriginal communities is just spiking way too high. It shouldn't happen at all anywhere, but in particular, it is very, very high, very extreme in Aboriginal communities. So we were able to speak with these wonderful Inuit youth. And at the end, Clara brought out her medals, and the kids were trying them on and everything, and I was sort of beside her thinking, I wish I had a medal or a halo or something. It would have been great. But the kids, the beautiful kids, two of them came up to me and just gave me a hug, and then one of them told me her story. And I feel, in speaking about my story, if one person afterwards comes up and says, I recognize this. I think this is what it's about. It's about recognizing each other as human beings. Earlier today, and I don't know if he's here, I met a wonderful young journalism student named Martin. And he quoted me to myself, which is always dangerous. I do this too to people I'm interviewing, and they sort of go, did I really say that? But Martin quoted me as saying, I'm an ambassador at large for the Canadian Canoe Museum. That's not the quote. But my quote is, I really believe we're all in the same boat, and I really do. We're all here together as human beings, no matter what. And we all suffer together. One of my most favorite words in the whole language is compassion, which literally means to suffer together. And I think it is a very, very beautiful concept, and I also think that when Canada is at its best, Canada is a compassionate country. My lovely hosts have asked me to speak about how my life intersects with reconciliation between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people in Canada. And I'm really honored to do that. This is the first time that I will have spoken about the people I've met through being an honorary witness who have really inspired me. And they are people who also have suffered from depression, some kind of mental illness, family breakdown, and have, well, we call former residential schools students survivors. But in many cases, they have gone from surviving to thriving. I have seen so many examples of great resilience, and after a very bad start in life. And it's been incredibly inspiring, uplifting, and helpful. And nobody that I have met has been comparing their pain on a scale to anybody else's. We all experience a mental illness or depression in a different way, but it is so wonderful when you get to talk to somebody and use the language that we use to talk about mental illness, depression, you know, feeling empty, feeling alone, feeling as though nobody understands, and then you meet someone that understands, and they may not be from a culture remotely like yours. It's a really beautiful thing. And these stories of resilience are very, very powerful. When I was inducted as an honorary witness, it was in Inuvik, which was the second national gathering of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And for those, I don't want to assume that everybody knows what the Truth and Reconciliation Commission is, but it really has a mandate to hear the stories of the students, the former residential school students, but also to try to point us towards reconciliation at the end of their 5-year mandate, which is in June. And to do this, they've brought on board helpers, or people they call honorary witnesses. And you know how at very important gatherings like weddings or graduations or baptisms, we want these events witnessed. We want our families and our friends to be with us, not only to celebrate, but to also carry the memory, to carry the story forward. And that is what we are asked to do as honorary witnesses to the work of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And so when I was inducted, there were 4 other honorary witnesses, 5 actually. One was a Holocaust survivor. Another had survived torture in Guatemala. Another was an Aborigine from Australia and a friend of his who had started a reconciliation group in Australia. Another was a former residential school student, Grand Chief Ed John. And as I looked around, I thought, one of these things is not like the other. Here is a middle-aged white woman being asked to join this circle of people who have really gone through something, some kind of hell. Oh yes, and there was also a man from Bosnia who had witnessed the wholesale destruction of his village. But I understood that I have a big mouth, and I'm not afraid of a microphone. I want to share stories, and that's what I've been doing as an honorary witness, is to take the stories that I've heard in gatherings such as Inuvik, Saskatoon, Montreal, Victoria, Whitehorse, and share them, and Vancouver most recently, share them with other people. But this was a very interesting experience for me. I feel I've always been a witness to other people's stories as a journalist at CBC Radio. When Joan introduced me as a veteran, I know that means old. I do know that. And I've met some of you who've said, I've listened to you for many, many, many years. Next time you can just say one many. One many will suffice. But I have been very privileged to help people get their stories out there. And so I began, the next day after we were inducted in a very beautiful ceremony, I began to witness the testimony, the statements, the lived experience of residential school survivors. And I think many of these stories are well known, the different kinds of abuse that were suffered, that were perpetrated. I have to say, I think the stories are shocking and they turn your skin inside out. Some of them are what Stephen Lewis, who was an honorary witness in Vancouver, called eviscerating. But I think what moved me most were the moments where parents would get up and say to their children, turn to the audience. And for instance, Terry Brown, who's an elder, she said to Murray Sinclair and Marie Wilson and Chief Wilton Littlechild, who were attending this session, I never told my children that I loved them. And at the end of her statement, she turned and faced the audience and invited her daughters to come up and join her. And she said, I want to say to you, I am sorry. And I want to say to you that I love you. And I mean, I lost it. I'm trained not to lose it. I'm trained not to feel that kernel of empathy, because I have to keep the story moving along. And I did lose it, and I was sitting at the end of an aisle as you are right now, and all of a sudden I felt an arm around me, and I looked up, and it was an Inuit man, and he asked me if I was okay. And he gave me some Kleenex, he gave me a bottle of water. I honked into the Kleenex, I had a swig of water, and I thought I was going to be okay. And he stayed with me until he thought I was okay. His name was Jackie Novalek from Coral Harbor. And the optics of this, I'm sure you can appreciate. Here is an Inuit man comforting a non-Indigenous woman who is crying because she is witnessing an Indigenous woman telling her daughters for the first time in her life that she loved them. I was blown away, not only by the courage of Terry Brown and witnessing what was essentially a family reunion, but also the kindness of Jackie Novalek. And I think this kind of generosity is so sophisticated. It's so advanced. It is so enormous. And it is not something that we practice every day. And it is very inspiring. After Jackie helped me back to myself, I went to listen to other testimony, and I was also assigned my day to speak as an honorary witness, and it turned out to be Canada Day. And as I was listening to the stories, I began to feel a great shame about my country, about the real history of Canada, the history that we don't learn, especially, I would say, my generation and many of the people here. We didn't learn about residential school in our history books. We learned about first contact. As one of my hosts was saying this evening at dinner, we learned about when Cartier stuck a flag into the land, or Champlain did this. And then, the future had arrived in this land, and there were people here first. And the way they were portrayed in our history books, I remember in mine, as shy, red people with childish ways. Shy, red people with childish ways. No acknowledgement of a very powerful, beautiful, spiritual, respectful of the land kind of culture. And listen, I only learned about this within the last decade. It was really through a series we were doing on my program called Sounds Like Canada. Every 2 weeks, we did something called Our Home and Native Land, which my Aboriginal friends called Our Home on Native Land. And we were talking about not just trials and tribulations in Aboriginal country. We were also talking about great successes, triumphs. And, but I did notice in almost every single discussion that we had, residential school came up. And I thought, well, I better find out about residential school. And then I started to read about it and learn about it, talk to people about it. That has been one of the great privileges of my job. If I'm curious about something, I can find out about it, and I can put it on the radio. I kept hearing the phrase intergenerational, the intergenerational impact. And I didn't really know what that meant. I mean, yeah, I know what the word means, but what did it really mean to a family? And so I asked a friend of mine who was very involved in the healing movement, Dr. Maggie Hodgson, if she could help me meet a family and maybe I could record their, I don't need my glasses, I don't think. Maybe I could record their story. And so she introduced me to the Jones family of Nanaimo. And John Jones was 55 at the time of this interview, which was about 5.5 years ago. His daughter Lillian was 33, and her daughter Victoria was 15. John had gone to Alberni Residential School, and essentially he didn't learn how to love. And he certainly didn't learn how to, parent has now become a verb. He didn't learn how to parent. He didn't have any of those skills. And so he passed that lack of skill on to his daughter, Lillian, who did not have a good relationship with her daughter, Victoria. And this was the first time they'd ever sat down to talk about it. John told Lillian and Tori what had happened to him and his brother at Alberni. You may now know Alberni Residential School as one of the places where the nutritional experiments were carried out. And John was there just as the experiments that were stopping, but they happened there. And Lillian was she talked about how John had been absent for her entire childhood, except when he came home. And I want you to know I'm allowed to speak about this. And he got drunk and physically, beat her. And this was how she disciplined her own daughter. So this was, I know this is hard to listen to. It was hard to hear. I didn't know what to say. Normally, I know where I want to go. I can push a conversation along, but I didn't know what to say. And John spoke haltingly. There were many silences between what he said, because I think as he was saying it for the first time ever to his daughter and granddaughter, the enormity of his loss of innocence and love and being a loving father really came front and forward to him. I asked them all if they wanted what I recorded edited, and they said no. They wanted Canadians to understand. They wanted Canadians to understand why Aboriginal people are the way they are. And of course, this isn't universal, but so many Canadians have an idea that an Aboriginal person, I'll just use a Toronto example, is someone who hangs out at Queen and Bathurst Street asking for money to go and get drunk. And without what we don't do when we think about Aboriginal people in this way is ask why. Why are they there? Why do they want to obliterate their minds? What is that pain that is at the core? And I've asked people who are reformed alcoholics, why did they drink? And they say that, you know, when you drink, you can't think. And when you can't think, you can't remember. What I know has helped the people that I have met at these truth and reconciliation gatherings is sharing their story. That an enormous load is lifted off when a story is shared. There was another honorary witness in Halifax, Dr. Michael Rashid Taylor, and he said, he wrote a poem about how he felt he helped to carry the pain. Again, this is, I think, compassion. And that it was hard even to listen to, but it was important to help carry that pain. And I think that's true for us as a country. I think it's also true for us as individuals. And if I may speak about people dealing with mental illness, it's really important that the people around them help to carry the pain. For instance, say someone has a broken leg. We are literally going to carry meals to this person. We are going to make sure that they heal. A mental illness is a break. It's a break in the spirit. It was certainly a break in my spirit, and my biggest moment of this was 4 months long. And I really didn't know if I was going to come out the other side. But I still have, I hope, a wonderful husband. Maybe I should call him. He helped me. He helped me by just being there, by being present, and by answering the phone, by answering emails, by dealing with mail, by paying my specific bills, and allowing me the time to heal as we would allow someone with a physical illness or physical break that we can see. This is still an illness, even if we can't see it. And I think we have to, when we meet people, we have to go behind what we meet. We have to go beyond the physical and ask ourselves, I mean, I think about David Gilmour, who is a Canadian writer who came out and said some pretty awful things about women. I will say that. But I want to ask him why. Why, David, are you saying this right now? And I bet there is a reason. I bet there's something that is not right in David's life. I think we have to ask why more often as Canadians. And I think we have to ask that about our history. Why did this happen? How did this happen? It must never happen again. So what must we do to stop it from happening? And I have a few ideas about that too. And after I spoke with the Jones, I pledged I would do whatever I could to bring Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people together. And I thought, let's do it over food. So the first thing I did was to invite the Jones over to my dining room. And so there were 6 of us all around for brunch. And then they invited me and Charlie, who had also been with me as my technician recording this interview. They invited us to Thanksgiving, and there were 35 people around their table. And then I got together with the people who run Joy Kogawa House. Joy is a wonderful Canadian novelist. Her family was interned during the Second World War. They moved to the interior of British Columbia. They were farm laborers. This is her childhood home, and it has been purchased by the Land Conservancy of BC. And Joy insisted on only one thing, that it be used for social justice purposes. So we had 30 people came to have a little bit of a sort of coffee and tea and cheese and crackers and talk about reconciliation. And boy, the people that came, there was the Aboriginal Writing Group from UBC, there was someone studying to be an Anglican minister, there were people involved in computer technology, someone was creating essentially a video video game that was about residential school, where you would lose points, for example, if you spoke your own native language. It was really interesting to see this mix. And I was there with an Aboriginal writer named Richard Van Camp. He's from the Northwest Territories. And he's a wonderful writer, very funny guy. And at the end of our evening, and really what we did was we kind of went around the circle and people just told why they were there, which is actually a very powerful tool. Why are you here tonight? I'd love to ask all of you. And as you can tell, you know, when you have me on the radio, you can also turn it off. And don't worry, there will come a time. But Richard, I was struggling to, how do I conclude this evening? How do I sum it up? And he said, Sheila, this isn't a radio show. We can just go and have tea and coffee and keep on talking. And that's what we have to do. We have to go together, have tea and coffee together, break bread together, and keep on talking. I got excited about bringing people together over food at this gathering at the Joy Kogawa House. And one of the people who came to the gathering was a guy named Todd Wong, who lives in Vancouver, and he's created these amazing dinners that celebrate Robbie Burns Day and Chinese New Year at the same time. And he calls it, the Chinese for Happy New Year is Gung Hei Fat Choi, and he calls it Gung Haggis Fat Choi. And so we decided that we would get together and have a Gung Haggis night in Nanaimo, but invite the Coast Salish people to come as well, so that it would be kind of a Gung Haggis Fat Choi powwow. And it was wonderful. 60 people came. The Coast Salish people who came, one of them phoned me up and said, how many people have reserved? And I said 60, and they said, great, we're going to bring something. And they brought canned wild salmon, their own, for every single person there. And everybody offered a gift. Not necessarily something you could take home and then go and eat the next day, but everybody, again, we went around the restaurant and talked about why they had come. People offered a song. People were prepared to recite Robbie Burns poems. Todd did a Cantonese version of a Robbie Burns poem. And the menu was amazing. There were haggis wontons and beautiful wild salmon with a ginger green onion sauce. So you've got the Coast Salish and you have the Chinese mixing, and it was really wonderful. And what I've discovered in these nights is that we really enjoy each other's company. You know, it's just amazing. And I don't know why we deny ourselves the pleasure of each other's company. Well, actually, I do. It's our history, and it gets in the way. And it's a colonial history, no matter what our Prime Minister might say when he speaks at G20 gatherings. There are so many colonial practices that carry on to this very day. And we have to acknowledge that. I think that's where it will begin, with that recognition and acknowledgement and understanding. I also think that it will begin when we talk to each other as human beings. I think we all want the same things. We want our kids to be happy, healthy. We want to enjoy the rights and privileges of living in this wonderful country. We want things to be better in the years to come, not worse. We want to know that our drinking water is going to be safe to drink, and that we will still have food and safe shelter and so on. There's so much that unites us, so much more, I think, than what divides us. But it does require us being together to talk about where our lives overlap, like Venn diagrams, you know, from math, where the circles overlap and there's that space that we share. And I can think of another woman who inspired me at a Truth and Reconciliation gathering. Her name was Marilyn Ingram Simon. And I was late for a session. I ran in and there was only one seat left. And it was beside this woman, and I asked her if I could sit down beside her. And she was Mi'kmaq, she is Mi'kmaq. and she was a survivor from Shubenacadie School in Nova Scotia. And I said, "May I sit beside you?" And she said, she looked at me and she said, "Frankly, white people really trigger me." And so I said, "Give me 5 minutes, I'll have a hot flash so severe I'll be redder than you are." And it was a risk, but you know, she was a middle-aged woman like me, and I sat down and we started talking about our worst hot flashes, and it was absolutely amazing. So we were just two women at that point. We weren't, "I am this and you are non that." You know, it was really neat. And we continued our conversation, and she said, I'd really like it if you would sit in the front row while I'm giving my statement, just to know that you're there, and maybe you can just sort of help hold me up a little bit if I falter." And it was amazing. So she talked about her experience, which was awful. She lost a brother and a sister, one to illness and one perhaps not to illness, to a beating. And she said when she came to present her statement, she always bought something in honor of her brother and her sister. And she brought along a baseball cap for her brother and a necklace for her sister. And there was a moment where she thought she was going to lose it. By the way, I also told her it's fine to lose it. It's absolutely fine to lose it. But she looked right at me, and she carried on. And at the end of this, she came up to me in the front row and gave me the necklace that she had bought in honor of her sister, which I wear all the time. And the possibility of that kind of generosity, the desire to actually connect, even though you think you don't want to. I met a beautiful person. Her generosity, her forgiveness inspires me enormously. When I was first named to be an ambassador for the Canadian Canoe Museum, they asked me if I would go and interview wonderful canoe maker named William Commanda. He and his wife Mary made beautiful birch bark canoes. They are Algonquin, Kitigan-Zibi. They live just outside of Maniwaki, Quebec, not far from Ottawa. And I went to interview him, and as we were talking, he said to me, "I know there are times when you aren't okay, when you feel sad. And what you need to do is to go out into nature and forgive yourself." And I thought, wow, I don't need forgiving. Other people in my life need to be forgiven. But you know, that has really stayed with me. Being out in nature is healing, for one thing, but forgiving yourself for guilt, for shame, for things that you've done to hurt other people. Forgive yourself for harboring resentment towards the people who have hurt you. I thought a lot about what he said, and forgiveness is a great medicine. My brother Rob, who is just one of the best people that I know, was for many years a heroin addict who lived in the downtown east side. And we didn't know if he was alive or dead. And one day, Charlie and I were driving through Vancouver, and I thought I saw him outside of a liquor store. And I ran to find him, and he ran away. But finally, I did find him. This was years later. He'd given up heroin, and he was drinking. That became his addiction. And Rob is now, actually, it was 2 days ago, he celebrated his 6th anniversary as someone who has not had a drink or any kind of drugs, 6 years. And I think about him and how, as you sometimes do in 12-step programs, you're asked to take an inventory of your life and to make amends. I love the word amend. It means to change. And he has changed enormously. He's apologized to people he feels he's hurt. and he's just one of the most wonderful human beings on the face of the planet. We grew up, I really am going all over the place, right? See what happens when you don't follow, the 14-page script. But we grew up in a lovely family in Ottawa, 4 kids, I'm the oldest. My father's dead, he was a wonderful man. My mother's still alive. She teaches elocution at the University of Ottawa, and she's quite a grand woman. There was a lot of alcohol in our house. There were cocktail parties, and when I was a kid, my little brother was the cute little bartender, and he used to finish everybody's drinks, which everybody thought was, so cute, with his little bow tie and everything. And those seeds were sown very, very early. He got a taste for it. It did something to him. He liked what it did. He escaped his reality. And now he's addicted to health. He's addicted, he loves tea. That's great. But he's also really into doing good things for people without telling them that it's he who has done them. And it's the most beautiful turning around of a life that you could ever hope for. And he is an inspiration as well. He's also told me that it was the care of Aboriginal people in the downtown east side that kept him alive when he was an addict. And I think that is worth noting as well. I want to close by telling you one more story. This is just an everyday encounter, but it's a man I've never forgotten. I was going into a thrift store with a friend of mine in Toronto. This is about 2 years ago, this coming January. And I was wearing a duffel coat and these short little boots and leggings. It's kind of my uniform, except when I'm speaking publicly. And I found an ook pick. Some of you will know what an ook pick is, but if you don't, it's a toy. Ook pick is Inuktitut for snowy owl. And back in the 60s, the Reliable Toy Company took these ook picks and made them into, they were white with orange beaks and orange feet, but the originals, designed by a woman in Kuujjuaq named Mrs. Jessie Snowball, are sealskin. And they're really beautiful, and they're cute. I have 27 of them. Okay, it's a little bit weird, but so when you see an ook pick in the wild, like in a thrift store, you get really excited. And this one was $2.49. I can tell you on eBay they often go for a lot more. So I was just like so excited, and all of a sudden I heard "great legs." And I looked around through the shelf and I went, well, thank you. Because, I was wearing this short coat and my leggings. How conceited. And the guy looked at me like, what? And I said, well, didn't you just tell me I had great legs? And he said, no. And he pulled out this piece of leather, and on it was branded the Great Lakes. And And he and his friend were 2 Anishinaabe men. This guy's name was Wyatt. And my friend Margie and I just started talking to them about where they were from. We were laughing. I mean, this was just such a ridiculous situation. And we probably talked to them for about 20 minutes, and then we went up to the cash. I went to pay for my ook pick. Little bonus moment here. The woman at the cash looked at it, went, $2.49. And I said, yeah, I know, it should, I'll give it to you for 50 cents. Oh, God, too good. But Wyatt came up to me and he put his hand on my shoulder and said, I just want to thank you for talking to me, because nobody does. And I thought, it's so crazy. We just had such a wonderful encounter. And as Margie and I left, I told him it was wonderful to talk to him. As we were leaving, I heard this voice through a megaphone, hey, great legs, you be careful out there, because if you slip and fall on the ice, you won't have great legs anymore. What I love about that encounter is that it's so easy to talk to each other, over a shelf over a cup of coffee, over a hot flash. And it's what we need to do. Richard Wagamese, the great Ojibwe writer whose book Indian Horse was up in the Canada Reads discussion this year and was the people's choice, yay. He says that what we need to do is to talk to each other in our backyards as we're hanging out our laundry and start with, hi, how are you? Really, it's a start. We've got to make a start. And my Aboriginal friends have said, you know, what would be even better is if you said, hi, how are you, in their language. That would mark real reconciliation. But until we get there, just breaking the ice is really important. Lillian Jones, who is now my very dear friend, almost a sister to me, invited me to a book club. Incidentally, since our discussion, she decided that she was a receptionist at the Southern Laleham Healing Center where her stepmother worked. She decided to become a teacher, and she got a posting in Bella Coola in northern British Columbia. And she invited me to a book club. And in fact, we did Speaking My Truth. And a woman at the book club said, you know, I don't know what to say to Aboriginal people. And of course, Lillian's there, and she's thinking, geez, I've been in this book club for 10 months, and you know, you seem to have been just fine. But she said, I see these young mothers in the street. They seem to be wonderful mothers. And Lillian suggested, well, why don't you just tell them that they're wonderful mothers? Oh, well, I don't want to offend them. Well, how could you be offended by that, said Lillian. So we just have to make a start. I think that when we do this, I think that there's something wounded in Canada, and we can fix that wound. We can fix that wound. It would be a beautiful, spiritual thing to do. I believe, as we're here in this space, that is what God wants us to do. I think He wants us to heal this wounded country, to heal our wounded souls, collectively and individually, and we can do it together. I really believe we can do it together. Whether it's somebody who's dealing with pain, the pain of mental illness, or the pain that has come from 150 years of residential school and other colonial practices, we can do it, but we can't do it alone. I want to thank you very much for being so attentive, for listening to me and the digressions that I went through. If I may pay tribute to you, I feel comfortable enough in your company not to have looked at my prepared notes. And I thank you very much for listening. Listening is not a spectator sport. I know that. It's full contact. Thank you very much.
We'll open the floor for questions now. There is a microphone in the center here.
Don't be afraid. Martin, are you here? Hey, Martin, how are you? Anything you wanted to ask earlier that you didn't get to ask, you could start it off. It's always hard to be the first person. It really is. And Martin, I don't mean to put you on the spot. But I guess I have. But I'm pretty open to talking about anything. However, we are also going to gather afterwards, and if you felt more comfortable coming up to me, you could ask me anything. I mean, seriously. What was Peter Zosky really like? I'm so glad you asked. Well, he was much like you heard on the radio. But you may have heard people who have been interviewed by Peter. I can't believe I'm interviewing myself, by the way, but people who've been interviewed by Peter who would go into the studio, and while the music was playing to get guests in and out, but also to feature great Canadian artists, he wouldn't speak to them. He wouldn't look at them. And then as soon as the microphones were on, you had every cell of Peter Zosky listening to you. He was the great listener. And the first time I ever had to fill in for him, I asked him, he pulled a muscle in his back. I was terrified because this was, I've said that this is like Dorothy filling in for Oz. And I said, what do I do? And he said, well, just listen. And I said, yeah, but then what? But the point is just listen. And listening is hard. It is actually, if you are doing it, it is demanding a lot of you. And Peter was great. He really was. Oh my goodness, are you taking the long walk to the microphone? That's fantastic. Would you mind saying your name?
My name is Shelagh Venga.
Hello, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. I was wondering, sometimes with mental illness or other things that have stigma, the start of speaking is sometimes even difficult within the home. So
Yes.
for Aboriginal families or even other families, what would you suggest from your life knowledge is the best way to promote speaking in the home about that?
That's a great question, and I'm really glad you asked it. I can tell you, even in my own experience, it was very difficult to tell my family when I got the diagnosis. In fact, nobody believed it. My family had known that I'd been off for weeks at a time, but I usually had fabricated, as I told Martin earlier, something like pink eye or strep throat. And beginning that discussion is one of the hardest things I had to do, because my parents felt as though they'd failed somehow, that they hadn't done enough, they hadn't paid enough attention, maybe I hadn't taken the right lessons, whatever it was. And what I would recommend, if it's at all possible, is I believe in the power of the dining room table, that everyone is there. Everybody knows at the same time. In my case, my family was spread out across the country, so some people heard first. I should have organized a conference call. Seriously, I wish I'd been able to tell everybody, because when I first told my family, it was really hard. And I felt like a failure. But once they understood, and they did research too, but I told them what it was like to be walking around with this for decades. They couldn't have been more supportive. But I do think I know there's stigma, and I know there's stigma within families, and I believe all families, I don't distinguish between families, but I do know that sometimes there are cultural differences. I know that I have a friend who's Asian Canadian, and she went to tell her family, and it was almost taboo. So this is something we've got to work on as a society, but I really believe in maybe even over dinner or nice tea or something, in a calm setting, telling everybody at one time and really looking for their help. I've been lucky to interview Jean Vanier a number of times, I'm really lucky, I know, who founded this beautiful communities called L'Arche all over the world with mentally disabled human beings, although he believes they are the really abled people, that we may have the mental disabilities, those of us who are in society in a different way. And he said, the greatest need is to be needed. I think we need to lean on each other. We need to give people the gift of being needed and asking them to be there for you. I wish I had the prescription, but that's what I think. I know that I wish it happened for me, and I think that is what has worked for some of my friends. It's not always easy, and families are not all together these days, and some of them my family was split up by the time I was 16. So it's a great question, but I really believe in getting it out. If someone is suffering from it, I really believe in sharing it.
Thank you so much. I'm a psychology student. I also asked my prof something along that lines, and I think you have more experience in this field than you got their answer here.
I'm sure that's not true, but thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for starting us off. I really appreciate that too. Thank you very much. Hello.
Hi, my name is Sandra Colson.
Hi,
and,
Sandra.
I was just, one comment was when you talked about Jackie up in
Yes.
the north who put his hand on your shoulder. I had a similar experience when I went to Chippewa of the Thames to see the unveiling of the monument for the Mount Elgin residential school there.
Wow.
And I had to leave a little bit early, and as I got up to leave, one of the ladies, one of the survivors, turned to me and said, "Thank you for coming," and I just about fainted.
Yeah.
But what I wanted to ask you was how and why did you become one of the official witnesses?
I know the why part. I'm going to stand out here. Sorry. I don't know the how part. I don't know how I got tapped on the shoulder, except that I have known Marie Wilson. Marie is one of the 3 commissioners of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. She has been a longtime broadcaster, one of our finest journalists, and I didn't know her well. I've come to know her much better as a commissioner. But just before she asked me, she had something that she called an engagement party, where she invited 12 women, this was in Vancouver, both Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal, to just really eat a meal with her. I love this, again, it's food. We were sitting in a circle, and she brought out a very smooth stone, and she passed the stone around to everybody, and onto the stone, we put our prayers for her, we put our wishes for her and for the work of the commission. And she carries this stone. I actually think she might be carrying it in her bra, but I know that it's very close to her heart. And I think it wasn't long after that I received the invitation on behalf of the commissioners to become an honorary witness. The why of it, why I said yes, was I really felt that Canada needed this, and that I wanted to try to get these stories onto the radio. That's a much longer story for me. I don't think we have paid enough attention to the gatherings. It's getting better, but the time is running out as well. But if you listen, and you may not, but to the next chapter, you may notice we have a lot of Indigenous writers on the program. And I'm not doing that just because this is my thing. It's because these stories are brilliant, and they are also stories that we need to hear, but they are amazing stories by amazing writers. And just, seeing Richard Wagamese, Joseph Boyden, Thompson Highway, Eden Robinson, I could go on, Richard Van Camp, all of these writers, Rosanna Deerchild, okay, getting the attention that they so deserve is very, very exciting to me. It's really, really thrilling. Why? The other part of why is I feel I'm doing something valuable as an honorary witness, and we can all be honorary witnesses. We can be witnesses for each other. We can be witnesses at these gatherings. You went to this wonderful unveiling as a witness. You are a witness because you were there, and you just carried that story on. And I think that's really important. We need to have more spaces where we can share these stories. I believe that. But I find it's, in a funny way, now I go to these gatherings, and it's kind of like a family reunion for me, seeing the people who are involved in the TRC, but also I'm meeting some wonderful survivors who go to the gatherings to support other survivors. And, one date isn't a relationship, but 2 dates or 3 dates begins a friendship. And that's another reason that I'm really committed to it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra, very much.
Hello, my name is Father Matthew George. I really
Hello,
appreciate your comments about starting these informal discussions with neighbors, with people around us. I'm just wondering, speaking in regards to the whole idea of mental health, are there things that on a community level, though, however, are there any particular initiatives that you've seen that have been more effective for getting that conversation happening at the community level?
I wish I had a really concrete answer for that. I think there are things that really work in a community. I stand before you as a success story. I said to Martin earlier, my story's a fairy tale. I went to my doctor, something was wrong, she got me diagnosed, I got treatment. Not only that, it was paid for by my employer. Not everybody has that privilege. And so what we have to make sure of is that story is everybody's story. I have a very good friend who has a daughter she's tried to kill herself 3 times in the last 3 weeks. And as soon as she's physically better, she's sent back to her apartment. She's 27. And she can't see a psychiatrist for 3 weeks. So what the community can do is push for accessibility. There've got to be places where somebody like my friend Molly can go. As far as initiatives that work, I hear great stories coming out of Vancouver. The Canadian Mental Health Association has gatherings and dinners, but I think maybe one of the best places I know is, in fact, an Aboriginal health center in Ottawa called Wabano. And you can go, anyone can go there. There's food. This is important. Meals, feeding, really, I'm sorry, I keep going back to that, but the fact that if you're looking for a meal, that's going to help your mental health if you're hungry and you get to eat. But they have counselors there. They participate in ceremony. They share stories together. There are workshops. There's, native art workshops. But as far as the sort of broader society goes, I'm stumped. Do you have any examples?
Well, no, I'm just wondering, though, from all your comments, if we're just at the stage where anything, is better than nothing.
I think you're absolutely right. There was a night a few weeks ago, I saw a fashion show where the clothes were inspired by people who have mental illness, and they tried to describe what that felt like, and the designers made clothes. Like, there was this one woman who described depression like being stuck inside a frozen waterfall. Wow, it's so beautiful. And the dress was kind of this pale green, you can almost see it in the marble here, and with icicles coming down. And so it was beautiful, and the pain was made into something beautiful by an artist. I thought that was, really effective and a kind of a safe way for people to try to understand. That same evening, there was a screening of a film called The Maze, made about William Kurelek, who spent time in, I don't know if you've seen it, but in a mental institution, or an asylum, I guess they called it in those days, in London, England, in the 60s. And he drew what was going on in his head. So that was the movie made in the 1960s. At this screening, the filmmaker's sons had taken The Maze and actually animated the drawings of William Kurelek. So people who didn't know what it was like were going, oh my God, this is unbelievable. Events like this, I think, really, like that particular event, really help, because people, they don't know what might be going on, hearing voices and so on. That kind of thing helps a lot. But I'm also very interested in what workplaces can do, and again, the biggest thing is talk.
Sure.
But I wish I could. I feel I've kind of let you down on my answer. I wish I knew.
That's all right. That's very helpful.
But thank you, Father. Thanks for asking. Hey, everybody. This is Martin.
Hello again. It's great that Canadians have people like you and Claire Hughes to put a face to mental illness. When you were growing up with this, was there anyone that you could look at and say, hey, they're going through the same thing?
No. I can't think of anybody. People weren't talking about depression when I was 17 or 18. And I'm trying to think of when I first became aware of it as a term. probably when I first started doing stories about it and thinking, that sounds familiar. But I didn't think it was me because I was pretty sure that this was a hormonal issue, right? Because someone in a white coat told me it was. And I really trusted that individual. I can't think of a soul now that as I look back. I know that my grandmother, when I started talking about it with my family, to address our first questioner, my grandmother was diagnosed, and I didn't know that in her lifetime. I had no idea, and I wish I'd known. I wish I could have been there to help her. I just had no idea. So yeah, I mean, the big answers talk, but there are bigger societal needs we have, like accessibility and making sure that the kind of treatment that I had in my privileged position is universal. Universal health care exists in this country unless it's a mental illness. And Roy Romano called mental health care the orphan of the Canadian healthcare system back in 2002 when the Romano report came out. Michael Kirby calls child and youth mental health care the orphan of the orphan. And that's something that I hope will really be addressed with the report of the Mental Health Commission, but we don't have to wait till then. So, thank you. Short story long again, eh, Martin? Thanks. Hi.
Hi, my name's Eileen Bjorn.
Hi, Eileen.
Hi, thank you for coming tonight. It's great to see you. I'm a teacher with the Catholic School Board here, and last year, I teach grade 3, and last year our board was very big on pushing the mental health awareness week. So our school, we're given bracelets for all the kids, and I know the public board, other kids I know from the public board, they were wearing them as well. And they had sent video clips that we could share with our students. So like we had day 1, there was a video clip. So we could show it. It was really short, maybe 2-3 minutes long. And then, simple things like, what does a bad day look like?
Yes.
Yeah. And it was really powerful that even at the grade 3 level, they could identify with what these video clips were about, and we could talk about it. And it was the first time, I've been teaching for 23 years now, it's the first time we've ever really discussed it specifically like that. So I just want to say that I do
so
see some
great.
progress that is happening, certainly here within London, and I just hope it continues and it grows from where it started.
Thank you very much. I'm really delighted to hear about that, and I think it starts at grade 3, that kind of education.
Absolutely.
Yesterday, I was at the Children's Book Awards in Toronto, and one of the books that was I think doubly nominated and won one category was called Virginia Woolf, and it's actually about Woolf, not the writer. And it's a picture book, and it is about a sibling who is depressed, and as the sibling starts to get better, the illustrations are all in gray and white and maybe a little bit of dark gray, but as the kid starts to get better, more and more color starts to enter the picture, and it's a very beautiful representation of what it's like. And at the end, the colors are almost psychedelic, or as I once said on the radio, physodelic. Anyway, but I'm thrilled to hear that. That's just wonderful news, and I think that's where it starts. Thank you so much. Yeah. Hi.
Hi. My question is relating to something you said regarding depression, that if you don't laugh at it and stare it down, it'll get the best of you. And I'm wondering how, when you're in your shell.
Oh, I'm not. I don't laugh then. Don't worry.
And not participating in your own life and going through these symptoms, how do you stare it down?
Oh, I don't. I don't do it when I can't do anything when I'm there. I really think staring it down is, I now recognize when it's coming on, and that's when I can stare it down, but sometimes I can't do that. I'm really glad you asked that, because that's not an impression I would like you to go home with. Oh. There are some times I can do it, and I said to Martin earlier, I feel myself shutting down. I feel myself closing down, like shuttering everything. My husband recognizes the symptoms now, and I almost feel I can't talk, I can't unclench my jaw, but if I can get it early enough, if I can get in there, and listen, it's nothing to laugh about, but I do think humor is important when we're talking about things like mental illness and even reconciliation. I have a friend who's a Mohawk elder, and his name is John Cree, and he always talks about his identity issues, you know. But it's important to see the humor too. I mean, what's funny about mental illness? Oh my God. I mean, I look at myself, and during this breakdown that I had, I completely lost the will to have a shower, brush my teeth. I mean, you know, I can sort of look at that person and think, you know, that's weird behavior, that's kind of funny, but it's not funny, ha-ha. What I can sort of think about and laugh at is, you know, how you take an antidepressant and you gain 45 pounds, and you're depressed, so you take more antidepressants. I mean, that's the kind of, I mean, this is not like huge knee-slapping humor, but there is humor in it. And I think that it's our human impulse in dark times, like funerals. Somehow, we're very prone to laughter at these extreme times. So staring it down, though, I do work very hard every day to do 10,000 steps a day. I've got this Nike Fuel Band. My step count, I will just find it for you, is now at 9,337. Walking has been a way I stare it down. Eating sensibly, getting 8 hours of sleep. I was on shift work for years and years, and I never slept more than 3 or 4 hours in a night, and that was bad. So those are the ways I stare it down, I guess. And I also talk to my husband now when I feel it. And those are the things that if I can, I can push the dragon back into its cave. I really appreciate your question because it allowed me to clarify.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hi, Sheila. I'm Pen Kemp.
Hi, Pen. Hi, nice to meet you.
I think it's a continuation of what she just asked. And I really wanted to thank you for the way you wove together the reconciliation and your personal depression, your personal story, because the community is always grounded in the personal story. And I felt from what the stories you were telling that forgiveness and the community work was serving you as well in having you embrace the larger person that you are. Would you like to talk about how the community work served your depression or served you, not your depression? But
Yeah. That's a great question. Again, I think of Jean Vanier, but I also think about how when you have the strength and you're healthy, getting outside of yourself is important, and just the joy of being in relationships with people, the joy of meeting new people. People who tease your mind and excite your imagination. I think that has been very helpful. I haven't had an episode or you know, someone once told me she doesn't call them breakdowns, she calls them breakthroughs because she always learns something. But, you know, it's different for everybody. I don't think I've always learned a lot during these spells, but it hasn't happened in 6 years. And, well, thank you, but thank you. But I will tell you what I struggle with in a really big way. I like to be very busy, and I haven't found the right line yet. I'm really working on this. I love my work, and you know, I think I have the best job in Canada, but. And I host a lot of stuff because I really like meeting people, and I like being on a tightrope without a net and stuff like that. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But I haven't found the line. I haven't found the balance, and I'm seeking the balance. And you know, this isn't solved for me yet. This riddle isn't solved for me. I feel I've recovered. I don't know that you ever are cured, but being busy helps, but sometimes I'm just too crazy busy. It's, and I don't hold on to my friendships, and sometimes it's really hard on my marriage. Wow. Has anyone got a couch here?
Well, thank you, and blessings on finding the balance.
Well, here. Thank you, Pen. Twitter pal, Facebook pal. Nice to meet you. Thank you. That's it. Okay.
I'd like to invite Sister Loretta Manzara for thanks and closing remarks.
Thank you, Sheila. It's good when a speaker does that for you, because I always feel if I do it myself, I'm drawing too much attention to myself. Anyway, I just want to bring us back to the end of Sheila's talk and remember that tremendous sense of applause that we offered her that went on and on and on. And really, I think that speaks far more than any words I can put together. I was trying throughout the presentation to hold on to this and then to hold on to that and hold on to this. As you said, you let your heart just speak according to what you felt the room really wanted tonight, and that was just magnificent. There were so many things that touched me personally. As a sister of St. Joseph, I'll start there because I know the task was a challenge. We wanted you to speak about your own personal journey with depression, and we also wanted you to share with us all those wonderful stories of being the honorary witness and the storyteller, to continue the story, to break that open for our world. And I think you accomplished that in a marvelous way, Sheila. There's so many things that I know we as sisters will take into our conversations as we continue to work with our partners in the truth and reconciliation opportunities we have here in London. And even more so, I was thinking about our founding sisters here in London who started out caring for those who were so desperately sick, and to educate not only to bring us through the school system, but to educate about life. And I think tonight, your talk has continued that witness for us of looking at life as it truly is, asking the question why, and holding that in the context that we are all able to do something to heal our nation, Canada, and to heal our souls as the Canadian people. For us in our community, that hooks into what we call our charism of unity and reconciliation. So you've done a tremendous job for us, and I'm so proud that you were our lecturer tonight. Thank you very much.
Down in the back. Ditto. We'll see you for coffee? That would be wonderful. Okay.